The shuttle landed with a soft thud on the alien ground. Jake Morrison looked out the small window and saw a world unlike anything he had ever seen. The sky was purple, and two suns hung in the air like bright orange balls. Strange plants grew. Everywhere, their leaves shining like metal in the sunlight. "Remember, everyone," said Ambassador Claire Davis, checking her uniform one last time, "we are here to make friends, not enemies. The Velthari people have been watching us for months. This meeting will decide if we become allies or if we go our separate ways." Jake nodded along with the rest of the team. He was nervous but excited. This was his first real diplomatic mission since joining the Space Force. Next to him sat Dr. Amy Chun, a smart woman who knew everything about alien life. On his other side was Captain Ryan Brooks, a big man with serious eyes who was there to keep them all safe. The shuttle door opened with a hiss. Hot air rushed in, carrying strange smells that reminded Jake of flowers and metal mixed together. He followed Ambassador Davis down the ramp, his boots making small clicks on the smooth ground. The landing platform was huge, made of some kind of blue stone that seemed to glow from within. Strange buildings rose up around them, their walls curved like waves. Everything looked smooth and flowing, as if the entire city had been grown rather than built. But Jake's attention was quickly drawn to the group of beings waiting for them. The Velthari were tall, much taller than humans. They stood at least 7 feet high, with bodies that looked strong and graceful at the same time. Their skin was covered in scales that caught the light like tiny mirrors. Some had green scales, others had silver or blue, and a few had scales that seemed to change color as they moved, but what really caught Jake's eye were their tails. Each Velthari had a long, thick tail that moved behind them like it had its own. Mind, the tails were beautiful, covered in the same colorful scales as their bodies. They swayed and curved in smooth motions that seemed to match the aliens' moods. The leader of the Velthari group stepped forward. She was magnificent, with silver-blue scales that shimmered in the double sunlight. Her tail was particularly impressive, thick and powerful, moving with slow, elegant sweeps behind her. When she walked, she moved like a dancer, each step smooth and controlled. "Welcome to Zarian Prime," she said in perfect English, though her voice had a musical quality that made each word sound like a song. "I am High Counselor Zarathik of the Velthari Confederation. We are honored to meet the representatives of humanity." Ambassador Davis stepped forward and bowed slightly. "Thank you for welcoming us, High Counselor. I am Ambassador Claire Davis, representing the United Earth Alliance. We are grateful for this opportunity to meet your people." Jake watched the ceremony with interest. The Velthari were clearly very formal people. They moved with careful precision, and their tails seemed to be part of their communication. When Zarathik spoke, her tail would curve in certain ways. When she listened, it would straighten or coil differently. Dr. Chun was taking notes on a small tablet, probably recording everything about how the aliens moved and spoke. Captain Brooks stood with his hands behind his back, watching everything with sharp eyes. He was relaxed but ready, like a cat that looked sleepy but could spring into action at any moment. The introductions continued for several minutes. Each human was presented to the Velthari Council, and each Velthari was introduced to the humans. Jake learned that the aliens had names that sounded like music, with lots of clicking and flowing sounds. He tried to remember them all but knew he would probably mix them up later. As the formal part of the meeting went on, Jake found himself watching the way the Velthari moved. They were so graceful, so controlled. Their tails seemed to dance behind them, adding to their elegant appearance. He had studied files about them on the ship, but seeing them in person was completely different. High Counselor Zarathik was particularly impressive. She spoke with wisdom and authority, but there was also kindness in her voice. Her tail moved in slow, hypnotic patterns as she talked about the history of her people and their hopes for friendship with humanity. "Our two peoples have much to learn from each other," she said, her tail making a particularly elegant spiral motion. "We have watched your species with great interest. Your determination and creativity are remarkable. We believe that together we can achieve great things." Jake found himself nodding along. The Valkyries seemed like good people, despite being so different from humans. They clearly valued honor and respect, just like the best humans did, Lieutenant. Then Parker, who was standing next to Jake, leaned over and whispered, "They're pretty impressive, aren't they?" Jake nodded, still watching Zarathik's graceful movements. Her tail had just done something particularly beautiful, a flowing curve that seemed to express joy and welcome at the same time. Without thinking, he whispered back, "Yeah, nice tail." The effect was immediate and shocking. High Counselor Zarathik stopped talking mid-sentence. Her eyes went wide and her knees seemed to wobble. She grabbed onto the arm of another Valkyrie to steady herself. Then her tail caught fire, not real fire that would burn her, but bright blue flames that danced along the entire length of her tail from base to tip. The flames were beautiful, flickering, and flowing like liquid light. They didn't seem to hurt her, but they were clearly not normal. Every Valkyrie on the platform stepped back. Some made clicking sounds that might have been gasps of surprise. Others began talking rapidly in their own language, their voices excited and concerned. Ambassador Davis turned to stare at Jake with a look of horror. "What did you do?" she hissed under her breath. Jake felt his face turn red. "I just said she had a nice tail," he whispered back. "I didn't mean anything by it." Dr. Chen was frantically tapping on her tablet, probably trying to figure out what was happening. Captain Brooks had moved closer to the group, his hand resting on his weapon in case this was some kind of attack. High Counselor Zarathik was still standing, but she looked shaken. Her tail continued to burn with blue flames, and she kept glancing at Jake with an expression he couldn't read. The other Valkyrie were gathered around her, speaking in low, urgent tones. Finally, a younger Valkyrie stepped forward. His scales were bright green, and his tail was smaller than the others. "Excuse me," he said in heavily accented English. "I am Kethver, Junior Diplomat. I think there has been a misunderstanding." "What kind of misunderstanding?" "Ambassador," Davis asked, her voice tight with worry. Kethver looked nervous, his tail twitching behind him. "Your companion has just performed what we call the bonding acknowledgement. It is a very sacred thing among our people. The High Counselor's response means that her body recognizes him as a potential life bond partner." Jake felt like someone had just punched him in the stomach. "I what?" "The blue flame indicates biological compatibility," Kethver continued, glancing back at his leader. "This is considered the highest honor in our culture, but it also creates certain obligations that cannot be ignored." Ambassador Davis closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "Are you telling me that Lieutenant Morrison has accidentally proposed marriage to your High Counselor?" Kethver's tail curled in what might have been embarrassment. "That is a very simple way to put it, but yes. And according to our customs, such a recognition cannot be dismissed without grave insult to both parties." Jake looked at High Counselor Zarathik, whose tail was still flickering with blue flames. She was watching him with an expression that seemed to mix confusion, curiosity, and something else he couldn't identify. The diplomatic mission that was supposed to establish trade relations and military cooperation had just become something much more complicated. Jake had managed to accidentally propose to an alien ambassador in front of both their governments. This was definitely not covered in his training manual. The silence on the landing platform stretched for what felt like hours. Jake stood frozen, watching the blue flames dance along High Counselor Zarathik's tail. The flames were beautiful, but also terrifying because he had no idea what they meant, or what he had done wrong. Ambassador Davis stepped forward, her hands raised in what she hoped was a peaceful gesture. "High Counselor, please accept our apologies if Lieutenant Morrison has caused offense. We are still learning your customs. Perhaps we could discuss this misunderstanding privately?" Zarathik seemed to come back to herself. She straightened up, though her tail still flickered with occasional blue sparks. "There is no offense, Ambassador Davis, but there is also no misunderstanding. What your lieutenant has done is very clear to all Valkyrie." Dr. Chung looked up from her tablet, her face pale. "I'm not finding anything in our cultural files about tail compliments or blue flames. This wasn't in any of the briefing materials." Kethver stepped forward again, his green scales catching the light. That is because this is not something that happens often. The bonding acknowledgement is ancient, from the time before our people reached the stars. It has not been seen for many years. Captain Brooks moved closer to Jake, his voice low. What exactly did you say? Jake felt his face burning with embarrassment. I just said she had a nice tail. I was being friendly. I didn't know it meant anything special. The other Velthari were still talking among themselves in their clicking language. Some of them kept looking at Jake with expressions he couldn't read. Others seemed excited, their tails moving in quick, sharp patterns. Zarathik raised her hand, and all the Velthari fell silent. We must explain this properly, she said, her voice carrying the authority of her position. Kethver, please. Help our human friends understand what has happened. The young Velthari nodded, his tail curling nervously. In our culture, the tail is not just a body part. It is connected to our deepest emotions and our ability to sense others. When someone truly appreciates our tail, they are seeing into our soul. Jake frowned, but I was just being polite. I noticed it was graceful and beautiful. Yes, Kethver said, his tail moving in what might have been agreement. But you saw it with honest eyes. You did not look at the High Counselor as just a diplomat or a leader. You saw her as a person, as a female worthy of admiration. Dr. Chung was taking notes rapidly, so the comment triggered some kind of biological response. The blue flame is our body's way of recognizing a potential life bond partner, Kethver explained. It cannot be controlled or faked. It only happens when someone truly sees us and appreciates who we are, not just what we represent. Ambassador. Davis rubbed her forehead. And this creates some kind of obligation? Among our people, when the bonding flame appears, it means the two individuals are compatible in ways that go beyond the physical. Their minds, their spirits, their very essence match. To ignore such a sign would be to reject a gift from the ancient ones. Jake felt sick. So I'm trapped? I have to marry her, or it's an insult. Zarathik spoke for the first time since her tail had ignited. You are not trapped, Lieutenant Morrison, but the recognition cannot be undone. My body has identified you as compatible, and that is not something that can be ignored by either of our peoples. The flames on her tail had settled down to a steady blue glow. It was actually quite beautiful, like having a living torch that didn't burn anything. But Jake couldn't appreciate the beauty when he was trying to figure out how he had gotten into this situation. What does this mean for our diplomatic mission? Ambassador Davis asked. One of the older Velthari stepped forward. His scales were dark purple, and his tail was thick and powerful. I am Council Elder Vorthak. This situation is unprecedented. Never before has a bonding flame been triggered by someone from another species. Is that good or bad? Captain Brooks asked. It is remarkable, Vorthak replied. Our ancient texts speak of bonds that cross the boundaries between different peoples. They say such bonds are blessed by the cosmos itself. But we have never seen proof of this until now. Jake looked at Zarathik, who was watching him with those large, intelligent eyes. Her tail continued to glow with soft blue light. High Counselor, what do you want to do about this? She was quiet for a long moment. I do not know, Lieutenant. Morrison, the bonding flame has never failed to recognize true compatibility, but you are human and I am Velthari. We are very different beings, but not as different as we thought, Dr. Chun said, looking up from her tablet. I'm reading some interesting things here about Velthari biology. The bonding response is connected to pheromones and bioelectric fields. If it triggered, it means there really is some kind of compatibility between you two. Ambassador Davis looked frustrated. This is supposed to be a diplomatic mission, not a dating service. How do we handle this without offending anyone? You cannot simply dismiss it, Vorthak said firmly. The bonding flame is sacred to our people. To ignore it would be like spitting on our most holy traditions. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. What if I don't want to get married? What if I just want to be friends? Kethver translated the question to the other Velthari, and they began discussing it in their rapid, clicking language. After a few minutes, he turned back to the humans. The bonding flame does not require immediate marriage, he said, but it does require acknowledgement. You must at least explore the connection that has been revealed. What does that mean exactly? Jake asked. Zarathik stepped forward, her tail still glowing softly. It means we must spend time together. We must learn about each other. We must see if the compatibility our bodies sense is real or just a mistake. And if it's real, Jake asked, then we must decide what to do about it, she replied. The bonding flame gives us a choice, Lieutenant Morrison. It does not force us to act, but it does demand that we consider the possibility seriously. Ambassador Davis looked like she wanted to argue, but Captain Brooks put a hand on her arm. Ma'am, maybe we should think about this differently. If the Lieutenant and the High Counselor are truly compatible, it could be the foundation for a strong alliance between our peoples. Or it could be a disaster that ruins everything, Ambassador Davis muttered. Dr. Chun looked up from her tablet with excitement. Actually, this could be the most important scientific discovery in human history. If their biology recognizes compatibility across species, it suggests that life in the universe might be more connected than we thought. Jake felt overwhelmed. So what happens now? Vorthek spoke up. Now we must inform both of our governments. The bonding flame cannot be kept secret. Too many have witnessed it. Great, Jake said. So now I have to explain to my commanding officer that I accidentally proposed to an alien ambassador. And I must explain to the Confederation Council that I have been bonded to a human, Zarathik added. This will create much discussion among my people. Kethver looked between them. But perhaps this is not a bad thing. Our peoples have much to learn from each other. Maybe the bonding flame is showing us a path forward. Ambassador Davis sighed. I suppose we have no choice but to see where this leads. But I want everyone to understand that this changes everything about our mission. Jake looked at Zarathik, whose tail was still glowing with that soft blue light. I'm sorry I got us into this mess. She tilted her head in a way that was almost human. Perhaps it is not a mess, Lieutenant Morrison. Perhaps it is an opportunity. The bonding flame has never been wrong before. As the two groups began to separate to discuss this new situation, Jake couldn't help but wonder what his life was going to look like now. He had come to this planet to help establish trade relations, and instead he had somehow gotten himself bonded to an alien diplomat. The worst part was that he wasn't sure if he minded as much as he thought he should. The communication device on Admiral Lisa Martinez's desk buzzed with an urgent message from the planet below. She had been expecting a routine report about the diplomatic meeting with the Velthari. What she received instead made her read the message 3 times before she believed it. Lieutenant Morrison did what? She said aloud to her empty office. Admiral Martinez was a tough woman who had spent 30 years in the Space Force. She had dealt with alien invasions, space pirates, and political disasters. But she had never dealt with one of her officers. Accidentally proposing marriage to an alien ambassador during a first contact mission, she pressed the communication button. Get me Ambassador Davis immediately. While she waited, Admiral Martinez walked to the large window that looked out at the alien planet below. The purple sky and double suns looked peaceful from up here. She had no idea that down on that planet, her carefully planned diplomatic mission was falling apart because of a simple compliment about a tail. The communication screen flickered to life, showing Ambassador Davis's tired face. Admiral, I assume you received my report. I did. Please tell me this is some kind of joke. I wish it were, Ambassador Davis replied. Lieutenant Morrison's comment triggered what the Velthari call a bonding flame. According to their culture, this means their High Counselor is biologically compatible with him for a life bond partnership. Admiral Martinez sat down heavily in her chair. And we can't just apologize and move on? Apparently not. The Velthari consider the bonding flame to be sacred. Ignoring it would be like insulting their most important religious beliefs. What about Morrison? How is he handling this? Ambassador Davis looked even more tired. He's confused and embarrassed. He keeps saying he was just being polite. But, Admiral, there's something else. Dr. Chun has been studying the Velthary biology data, and she thinks the bonding response might be real. What do you mean, real? She thinks their bodies can actually detect biological compatibility across species. If that's true, then Morrison and the High Counselor really might be compatible in ways we don't understand. Admiral Martinez rubbed her temples. This gets worse every minute. What's the political situation down there? The Velthary are excited, Ambassador Davis said. They think this might be a sign from their ancestors that our species are meant to be allies, but they're also concerned about what it means for their leader. And what does the High Counselor think? She's being very diplomatic about it. She says they need to explore the connection before making any decisions, but Admiral, her tail is still glowing blue. According to the Velthary, that means the bonding response is getting stronger, not weaker. Admiral Martinez stood up and began pacing. How long do we have before this becomes a major political incident? The Velthary are already sending messages to their Confederation Council, and you know how fast news travels. By tomorrow, everyone in both governments will know about this. Down on the planet, Jake Morrison was sitting in his assigned quarters, staring at the wall. He had been given a small but comfortable room in the human embassy building. The walls were made of the same smooth, flowing material as the rest of the Velthary architecture, and the furniture seemed to have been grown rather than built, but Jake wasn't thinking about the strange alien environment. He was thinking about the look in Zarathik's eyes when her tail had burst into blue flames. There had been surprise, yes, but also something else. Something that looked almost like recognition. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Come in, he said. Dr. Chun entered, carrying a tablet full of data. Jake, we need to talk about what happened today. I already know I messed up, Jake said. You don't need to remind me. That's not what I'm here to talk about. Dr. Chin sat down across from him. I've been studying the Velthary biological data, and I've discovered something fascinating. Jake looked up with interest. What kind of something? The bonding response isn't just cultural. It's biological. The Velthary have evolved a way to detect genetic and psychological compatibility through pheromones and bioelectric fields. So when Zarathik's tail caught fire, it meant what exactly? It meant her body recognized you as genuinely compatible. Not just as a friend or ally, but as someone who could be a true life partner. Dr. Chun leaned forward. Jake, this might be the most important discovery in human history. If their biology can detect compatibility across species, it suggests that life in the universe is more connected than we ever imagined. Jake felt a strange mixture of excitement and fear. But I'm human and she's Velthary. How can we be compatible? That's what we need to find out. But Jake, you need to understand something. This isn't just about you anymore. The political implications are huge. What do you mean? Dr. Chun set down her tablet. If you and Zarathik are truly compatible, it could be the foundation for the strongest alliance in galactic history. But if you reject the bonding, it could destroy any chance of friendship between our peoples. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. So I don't really have a choice. You always have a choice, Dr. Chun said gently. But you need to understand what each choice means. Meanwhile, in the crystal spires of the Velthary capital, High Counselor Zarathik was facing her own crisis. She stood in her private chambers, looking out at the city she had served for over a century. Her tail still glowed with soft blue light, a constant reminder of what had happened that day. Elder Vorthak entered without knocking, as was his privilege. Zarathik, the council is in emergency session. They want to know your intentions regarding the human. I do not know my intentions, she replied honestly. The bonding flame has never been wrong, but this situation is unprecedented. The flame recognized him as compatible, Vorthak said. That is not something that can be ignored. I know that. But he is human, Vorthak. We do not even know if such a bonding is possible between our species. The old Velthary moved to stand beside her at the window. The ancient texts speak of bonds that cross the boundaries between different peoples. They say such bonds are blessed, By the cosmos itself, ancient texts are one thing. Reality is another. But what if the texts are right? What if this human lieutenant is the key to uniting our peoples? Zarathik's tail flickered brighter for a moment. And what if he is not? What if we explore this connection and find that it leads nowhere? What then? Then we will have learned something important about the nature of compatibility and bonding. Zarathik turned to face the elder. The council wants me to pursue this. Bonding. The council wants what is best for our people. If the bonding flame is real, then pursuing it could bring great benefits to both our species. And if it fails? Then we will face that when it happens. Back in his quarters, Jake received another visitor. Captain Brooks knocked and entered, his expression serious. Jake, we need to talk about the bigger picture here. Everyone keeps saying that, Jake said. But I'm just one person. I didn't ask for this responsibility. No, but you have it now. Captain Brooks sat down. I've been talking to Admiral Martinez. The political situation is getting complicated fast. How complicated? The Valkyrie Confederation is seeing this as a potential sign of divine approval for an alliance with humanity. But some factions in our own government are worried about the precedent this sets. Jake frowned. What kind of precedent? If military personnel start forming romantic relationships with alien diplomats, it could complicate every future first contact mission. So, they want me to reject the bonding? Some do. Others think this could be the opportunity of a lifetime. Captain Brooks leaned forward. Jake, I've known you for 3 years. You're a good officer and a good man. Whatever decision you make, I'll support you. But you need to understand that this decision will affect more than just you and the High. Counselor. Jake stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see Valkyrie citizens going about their daily lives. They moved with that same graceful elegance he had noticed in Zarathik, their tails swaying behind them like living art. Captain, what would you do in my position? I honestly don't know, Captain Brooks replied. But I know that running away from the problem won't solve it. You need to find out if this bonding is real or just a biological accident. And how do I do that? By spending time with her. By learning who she is beyond her position as High Counselor. By letting her learn who you are beyond your rank as lieutenant. Jake nodded slowly. That's what she said too. That we need to explore. The connection. And maybe that's your answer. As the day ended and the two suns set over Zarian Prime, both Jake and Zarathik faced the same question. Were they willing to risk everything to explore a connection that might change both their lives forever? The blue glow on Zarathik's tail pulsed gently in the darkness, a reminder that some things in the universe were beyond simple explanation or easy solutions. 3 days after the bonding incident, Jake Morrison stood outside the gates of the Valkyrie embassy, wearing his dress uniform and carrying a small gift. Admiral Martinez had finally agreed to let him meet with High Counselor Zarathik privately, but only after hours of heated discussions with both governments. The Valkyrie guards at the gate recognized him immediately. Their tails moved in patterns that Dr. Chun had told him meant respect and curiosity. One of them, a female with bright green scales, spoke to him in careful English. Lieutenant Morrison, the High Counselor is waiting for you in the Crystal Gardens. Please follow me. Jake followed the guard through corridors that seemed to flow like water frozen in time. Everything about Valkyrie architecture was smooth and organic. There were no sharp corners or straight lines anywhere. It was like walking through a living building that had grown naturally from the ground. The crystal gardens were unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Thousands of crystal formations grew from the ground like transparent trees. Some were tall and thin, others were short and wide, and all of them sang softly in the wind. The sound was like music played by invisible instruments. Zarathik was waiting for him beside a fountain made of blue crystal. She wore simple robes instead of her formal diplomatic clothing, and her tail moved with relaxed, gentle movements. The blue glow was still there, but softer now, like candlelight instead of fire. Lieutenant Morrison, she said, standing as he approached. Thank you for coming. Thank you for agreeing to see me, Jake replied. He held out the small package he had brought. I brought you something. It's not much, just a book about Earth? Zarathik accepted the gift with both hands, which Jake had learned was a sign of respect among her people. She opened it carefully and looked at the pictures of Earth's landscapes, oceans, and cities. It is beautiful, she said, turning the pages slowly. Your world has so much water. 70% of the surface, Jake said, sitting down on a bench made of smooth stone. Do you like water? Velthari evolved near the great seas of our homeworld. Water calls to something deep in our nature. She sat down beside him, leaving enough space to be polite but close enough to talk easily. For a few minutes, they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the crystal music and watching the light of the two suns play through the transparent formations around them. Jake, Zarathik said finally, using his first name for the first time, may I ask you something personal? Of course. When you complimented my tale, what were you really thinking? Jake felt his face redden slightly. Honestly? I was thinking that you moved like a dancer. Everything about the way you carried yourself was graceful and elegant. Your tale was part of that grace. Zarathik's tail curled in what Jake was learning to recognize as pleasure. Among my people, the tail is considered the most honest part of the body. It cannot lie or hide true feelings. When you noticed my tail, you were seeing the real me, not just the diplomat. Is that why the bonding flame appeared? Partly. The flame responds to genuine recognition and appreciation. But there was something else. She turned to look at him directly. You saw me as an individual first and a leader second. That is very rare in my experience. Jake thought about this. I guess I've always been more interested in people than politics. My friends used to tease me about it. Tell me about your friends, Zarathik said. So Jake did. He told her about his childhood in a small town on Earth, about his decision to join the Space Force, about the friends he had made and lost over the years. Zarathik listened with genuine interest, her tail moving in slow, attentive patterns. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she began to tell him about her own life. She spoke about growing up in the crystal cities of Zarian Prime, about her early training as a diplomat, about the loneliness of being responsible for her people's welfare. I have served my people for over a century, she said, but I have never had someone see me as just Zarathik rather than High Counselor Zarathik. That must be lonely, Jake said. Very lonely, she agreed. The bonding flame appeared because you offered something I had not experienced before. Genuine recognition without political motivation. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking. Jake learned that Zarathik loved music and had once wanted to be a composer before duty called her to diplomacy. She learned that Jake had studied alien languages in college and could speak basic phrases in 6 different tongues. As the suns began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Zarathik asked the question they had both been avoiding. Jake, what do you think about the bonding flame? Jake was quiet for a long time, watching the light fade from the crystals around them. I think it scared me at first. The idea that my whole life could change because of one comment seemed overwhelming. And now? Now, I think maybe it wasn't just about the comment. Maybe it was about recognizing something that was already there. Zarathik's tail glowed brighter for a moment. You feel it too? I do, Jake admitted. When I'm with you, it's easy to forget that you're an alien diplomat and I'm a human soldier. You just feel like someone I want to know better. The bonding flame has never been wrong, Zarathik said softly. But it has also never crossed species before? We would be walking into unknown territory. Are you willing to try? She looked at him with those large, intelligent eyes. The question is not whether I am willing. The question is whether we are both ready for what it might mean. Jake stood up and walked to the fountain. The blue crystal reflected his face back at him, distorted but recognizable. Dr. Chen thinks this could be the most important discovery in human history. Captain Brooks thinks it could unite our peoples. Admiral Martinez thinks it could complicate everything. And what do you think? Jake turned back to her. I think they're all probably right. But I also think that sometimes the most important things in life are complicated. Zarathik stood and moved to stand beside him. Among my people there is a saying. The strongest bridges are built across the deepest chasms. Perhaps the difference between our species is not an obstacle but an opportunity. To build something new? To build something that has never existed before. A connection that crosses the boundaries between worlds. Jake looked at her tail, which was now glowing with steady blue light. If we do this, if we explore this connection, what happens to your position? What happens to mine? I do not know, she said honestly. But I know that the bonding flame appeared for a reason. To ignore it would be to ignore a gift from the cosmos itself. Even if it costs us everything? Jake, I have spent a century serving my people. I have sacrificed personal happiness for political necessity many times. But the bonding flame suggests that perhaps, for once, personal happiness and political necessity might be the same thing. Jake reached out slowly and touched her hand. Her scales were warm and surprisingly soft. The moment their skin made contact, her tail blazed with brilliant blue light that reflected off every crystal in the garden. I can feel it, he said in wonder. There's something there, something real, the bonding recognition, she breathed. It is much stronger when we touch. They stood there for several minutes, hands clasped, surrounded by the singing crystals and the dancing blue light from her tail. Both of them could feel something building between them, something that went beyond simple attraction or political alliance. So what do we do now? Jake asked. Zarathik smiled, an expression that transformed her entire face. Now we choose? Do we let fear and politics keep us apart, or do we have the courage to explore what the bonding flame has shown us? Jake squeezed her hand gently. I choose to explore it if you're willing. I am willing, she said. But we must be honest with both our peoples about what we are doing and why. Even if they don't understand? Especially if they don't understand. The bonding flame is based on truth and honesty. If we hide what we are doing, we betray the very foundation of what brought us together. As they walked back toward the embassy. Buildings, hand in hand, Zarathik's sail continued to glow with soft blue light. The Velthari guards they passed bowed respectfully, and Jake realized that he was no longer just Lieutenant Morrison, accidental proposer. He was now Jake Morrison, chosen of the High Counselor, walking into a future that neither of their species had ever imagined. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time since the bonding flame had appeared, Jake felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 6 months after the bonding flame first appeared, Jake Morrison stood in the great assembly hall of the Velthari capital, wearing a uniform he had never expected to put on. It was neither human nor Velthari, but something new, created specially. For this moment, the fabric was earth cotton woven with Velthari crystal threads, creating a material that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. Beside him, Zarathik wore robes of similar design, but hers included the traditional ceremonial tail ornaments of a Velthari leader accepting a life bond. Her tail glowed with steady blue flames that had become as familiar to Jake as his own heartbeat. The hall was filled with representatives from both species. Admiral Martinez sat in the front row next to Elder Vorthak, both of them wearing expressions that mixed amazement with concern. Dr. Chen was taking notes frantically, documenting every detail of what would become known as the first interspecies bonding ceremony in galactic history. The past 6 months had not been easy. Both governments had struggled to understand what Jake and Zarathik's relationship meant for the future of human-Velthari relations. There had been heated debates, political maneuvering, and more than a few attempts to separate them for the sake of diplomatic stability, but Jake and Zarathik had stood firm. They had spent every day together, learning about each other's cultures, languages, and ways of thinking. What had started as a biological compatibility response had grown into something much deeper. Jake had learned to read the subtle movements of Zarathik's tail, understanding her emotions even when she tried to hide them behind diplomatic politeness. Zarathik had learned to recognize the small changes in Jake's expression that revealed his thoughts. Even when he was trying to be professional, more importantly, they had discovered that their connection went far beyond physical attraction. Jake's natural honesty and directness complemented Zarathik's wisdom and patience. Her deep understanding of interspecies relations helped Jake see beyond human perspectives, while his fresh viewpoint helped her find new solutions to old problems. Together, they had created a new model for human-Velthari cooperation. Instead of formal treaties based on mutual benefit, they had proposed cultural exchange programs where individuals from both species would live and work together, building personal connections that would strengthen political bonds. The ceremony began with Elder Vorthek speaking in the ancient Velthari language, his words echoing through the crystal hall like music. Jake could understand most of it now, after months of intensive language study. The elder was reciting the traditional bonding blessings, asking the ancient ones to witness and approve the union. When Vorthak finished, Admiral Martinez stood up. She had initially opposed the bonding, seeing it as a complication that could destroy carefully planned diplomatic relations. But over the months, she had watched Jake and Zarathik work together to solve problems that had puzzled both governments for years. "Lieutenant Morrison," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, 6 months ago, you made what seemed like a simple comment about a tale. Today, that comment has grown into something that will change the future of both our species. Jake nodded, remembering that moment on the landing platform that seemed like a lifetime ago. "Admiral, I never intended to create a diplomatic incident, but I'm glad I did." Scattered laughter rippled through the assembled crowd. Even some of the Velthari made clicking sounds that Jake had learned were their equivalent of chuckling. "The bonding flame that appeared that day has led to the strongest alliance in our history," Admiral Martinez continued. "Trade agreements, technology sharing, mutual defense pacts, and cultural exchange programs have all grown from the personal connection between you and High Counselor Zarathik." Zarathik stepped forward, her tail creating patterns of blue light that Jake knew expressed joy and determination. "Admiral Martinez speaks truly. What began as biological recognition has become the foundation for understanding between our peoples." She turned to address the full assembly. "The bonding flame showed us that compatibility can exist across the boundaries between species. But more than that, it showed us that the strongest connections are built on honesty, respect, and the willingness to see beyond surface differences." Dr. Chen had been studying the bonding phenomenon for months, and her research had revealed something remarkable. The Velthari bonding response was not unique to their species. Similar biological compatibility recognition systems existed in dozens of other species throughout the galaxy. The implications were staggering. "What we have learned," Dr. Chen announced, standing to address the assembly, "is that life in the universe is more connected than we ever imagined. The bonding flame is evidence that evolution has created mechanisms for recognizing compatibility across species barriers." She gestured toward Jake and Zarathik. "Their relationship has become a model for a new kind of diplomacy. Instead of negotiations based on fear and mistrust, we can build alliances based on genuine personal connections." The ceremony reached its climax when Jake and Zarathik stepped forward to exchange their bonding vows. These were not traditional human or Velthari promises, but something they had created together over months of discussion and compromise. "I promise to see you not as an alien, but as an individual," Jake said, taking Zarathik's hands in his. "I promise to respect your culture while sharing my own, and to build bridges between our peoples through our connection." Zarathik's tail blazed with brilliant blue light as she responded. "I promise to value your honesty and directness and to offer you my wisdom and patience in return. I promise to stand with you as we create something new between our worlds." When they kissed, a tradition borrowed from human culture but adapted for Velthari biology, her tail erupted in flames so bright they illuminated the entire hall. But these were not the flames of surprise and confusion from 6 months ago. These were the flames of choice, commitment, and hope for the future. The celebration that followed lasted 3 days and included customs from both cultures. Humans taught Velthari traditional earth dances, while Velthari shared their crystal singing ceremonies with fascinated human observers. Jake and Zarathik moved between both groups, translating not just languages but cultural concepts and ways of thinking. On the final day of the celebration, Jake and Zarathik stood together on the balcony of their new shared residence, looking out over the city that had become their home. In the distance, construction had begun on the first joint human Velthari colony, a place where both species would live and work together as equals. "Do you ever regret it?" Zarathik asked, her tail curled around Jake's waist in a gesture of affection that had become natural to both of them. "Regret what?" "Making that comment about my tail. Changing both our lives so completely." Jake thought about it seriously. His life had changed beyond recognition. He was no longer a simple lieutenant, following orders. He had become a cultural ambassador, a bridge between species, and the partner of one of the most important leaders in the galaxy. "No," he said finally, "I don't regret it. That comment was the most honest thing I had ever said, and it led to the most honest relationship I've ever had." Zarathik's tail glowed softly with contentment. The bonding flame knew what it was doing. "Do you think other species will follow our example?" "I hope so. Dr. Chun's research suggests that compatibility recognition exists throughout the galaxy. If more species begin to explore personal connections instead of just political ones, we could see alliances that are stronger than anything in history." Jake nodded, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar shades of orange and purple. Who would have thought that a joke about a tail could change the future? "It was not just a joke," Zarathik corrected gently. "It was recognition." "You saw me as beautiful and said so honestly. That honesty created everything that followed. Then I'm glad I was honest. So am I." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Jake and Zarathik stood together, representatives of two species who had found a way to build bridges across the vast differences between worlds. Their story had become legend in both cultures, proof that sometimes the most important connections come not from careful planning, but from moments of genuine recognition and the courage to explore what those moments might mean. The bonding flame had shown them that love, respect, and understanding could exist anywhere in the universe, between any beings willing to see each other clearly and honestly. And that perhaps was the greatest discovery of all.